or it was the food service worker that they made that connection with. They are incredibly important to our schools. I could go over lots of districts where they've tried to privatize these services and saw no savings. As a general rule, when you add an entity that has to make a 30% markup, you're not ultimately going to save money. So we certainly support the centralization option and looking at efficiencies in the school district, because we want those people to remain as committed employees here.
I like to say that I also agree with that. And so while the board, the superintendent certainly has a duty to find ways to save our district money when we talk about shortfalls. And so I think it was necessary for him to do the RFP, but we of course love our employees. We certainly love our custodians especially, and so I personally have encouraged the superintendent to look at centralizing over the privatization. I think centralizing certainly protects our employees' status, but then it also addresses some of the issues that we face in our schools with cleanliness and things like that. And so while nothing has been brought to the board, I certainly support the centralization of our custodian services.
Anything, Melissa?
Carl Zalanka. Maybe, I hope I misread the article in the newspaper, but it seems that the solution to making some of our F schools better is to let somebody else do it. Why can't our school board do it?
So, welcome to the world of legislation. Legislation was passed about 3 years ago, soon after I became superintendent, that looked at the accountability system in the state, and when schools, it used to be that schools that were graded F were schools that had to ultimately have other kinds of interventions. Now in the state of Florida, if the school is a D, and is a D more than 1 year, it moves straight into those interventions. And one of those interventions that the state requires, you have 2 years to turn that school around. If not, there's only 3 options that is straight through legislation. 1 is close the school. Okay, we have to have school. All right. 2, you could turn it over to a charter company to run the school. Or 3, you could partner with an external operator. Ultimately, and that external operator is not in charge of the school. The superintendent of the board is still in charge of the school. And they have some background in turning around schools, and they work with the school districts in order to do that. And that's the option we've chosen. So all those schools, even though it says external operator, they are still under the direction of the school district, and that external operator, as required by the law, is partnering with us to work with those schools.
I would say, again, this is a scenario wholly created by the Florida legislature. This is, again, another manner in which we're going to try to get private entities taking over our schools to have our school board have to give money to someone else outside the district to do something we could do inside. Now, there's no doubt we have to address what's happening in schools that are failing. But there's nothing that any of these people are going to do that isn't something we could try locally. This is basically a forced manner of privatization and very consistent with what the Florida legislature has done in the last 15 years. So again, I think you have to look carefully at all of the things that happen in Tallahassee every year, because since I've been in Florida 9 years now, and every year there has been something that, again, is pushing that privatization mode, is pushing what Melissa said, the long-term plan to have no public schools.
So I'm going to be really blunt again and answer your question as it was asked. Why? Because it fast-tracks privatization. That's why. There's no reason for it except for that. It doesn't help teachers, it doesn't help students, it doesn't help the system. It fast-tracks privatization. And so when you look at the fact that roughly $300,000 at Foster Elementary last year was spent on an outside operator, where we took that $300,000 and put it into a community schools model that would actually assess the needs at that school and have some resources to meet those needs as identified by teachers and students and parents, we actually could have had turnaround, and instead we had to pay that to an outside operator to walk the halls and tell teachers what to do and create an app that does professional development, all things that the district could have done on its own and probably had one meeting with them. If you look at the outside operator that the district has just chosen, they weren't even allowed to choose their own outside operator. They were told no for who they wanted to, and they had to go to someone else. And that outside operator is owned by a former politician from the Tampa Bay area. And so that's why we can't turn around schools on our own, because nobody makes money off it.
So I definitely agree with Melissa there, and so we certainly don't like it. We think we could do better, and so, but as the superintendent said, this is something that's required by law. And so the simple answer is to not have our schools put in that situation where they can be taken over by an external operator. That's the challenge that we give the superintendent, to close that achievement gap. Every school in the district deserves to be an A school, and we would eliminate that problem. But as we just discussed, there's just some issues outside of our control, some struggles that we continue to deal with that continue to allow these schools to be low performing. But something else, the board has done is task the superintendent with thinking outside of the box. Let's think about some other ways that we could beat the system, so that we don't have to deal with these external operators, that we can be more proactive in closing this achievement gap, whether it's creating some type of internal district charter or something like that. But we really have to kind of get ahead of the system, start thinking outside of the box. But our first priority is to raise the achievement of all schools so it becomes a non-issue in our district, and we beat the whole game to try to privatize education.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lynn Pertek. As a former teacher in an elementary, Alachua County Title I elementary school, one of the best secret weapons was our homeschool liaison. We invited parents, and more importantly, we went into those communities to encourage as much interaction as possible. I want specifics. What are you doing? What activities are Hillsborough County Schools doing to reach those parents and encourage parent involvement in lower income schools? Specifics, please.
It's interesting you said that, because right now in 17 of our lowest performing schools, we have a parent liaison that will be working with those families in our communities, just like you said, because many times the families want to support, they're just not sure how to support, the needs, and that's where that connection really comes. We really feel very bad. We have social workers in all of our high-need schools, full-time social workers, full-time psychologists, full-time guidance counselors. Those folks do a great job, but they also have other work that they're doing during the day to support students. So that parent liaison is going to really be working that neighborhood and that community to develop that parent engagement. So that's one directly, and that sounds a lot like what you had success with there in Alachua.
We started 3 years ago and have continued to train teachers in the parent-teacher home visit project, so that teachers, because in many of our communities, our teachers don't look like our community, and so it's not just for parents to come into the schools, but for teachers to go into the community and understand the cultures and the homes that their children come from. We have 6 schools in Hillsborough County which are called community schools, and we have an entire year of working on deep dive needs assessments in those communities, with the goal being 75 to 100% penetration with every stakeholder group, including parents, asking what they really want, because we can do random acts of improvement, but if it's not tied directly to community need, then we're going to continue to struggle with schools. And so I have an incredible sense of urgency that kids spend 1 year in one grade and have to do that, but we do, when we look at systems change, it doesn't happen as quickly as we would like, so we need to be deliberate, and we need to actually have some research-based frameworks for doing it, and I believe that with the community schools work, that's where we're moving.
Let me just also say, excuse me, Stephanie, so one of the positions I advocated for when I first was elected was for an African American or Black outreach position. So we have that position and also a Hispanic position, which specifically target these families. And out of that has grown our parent liaison positions. So now they're one big group whose specific job is to focus on parental and community engagement. In addition to that, we have like our Achievement Schools Advisory Group, a group of community leaders who are also tasked with not only getting input on the Achievement Schools, but also reaching out to their network of folks to help them get engaged and involved. And then lastly, something we're really pushing this year, which we're getting some results, is working with Damaris Allen and the PTA group, really teaching our communities about what a PTA is, just something that we just don't do in our community. And so we're really trying to strengthen that, thinking out of the box again, where we can't get a whole PTA at one school. We're now creating what's called like a community PTA. We're getting as many folks as we can together to support as many schools as we can until they become self-sustainable, but that is certainly a priority.
I was going to say, in terms of what we're doing with teachers, Melissa noted both of those. We are working very strongly with 4 of the community schools to put in a research-based model and to actually track, do we make the change we want to see? Because if we do, then the goal would be to scale that to a larger degree to some of our schools. But we are also, again, trying to train our teachers in better ways to reach out, more interesting ways that you haven't tried to either get into the community or connect with parents. Finding out, again, if your parents aren't there because they're working 2 jobs, where are they working? Are they all kind of in one place? If they were all in a place, could you go see them? So we're trying to also work with teachers to get them, to give them some tools and ideas of interesting ways to reach out they might have not have thought of at this point.
Thank you. You were, did you just join?
No, I'm ready.
You're ready, so you're not a member yet. Would you like to join? You can't ask a question. We would love to welcome you to membership, though.
First, thank you for doing such a successful job in educating the community to get the tax levy. I think that was really critical. I think it's evident that what we need to do, everyone in this room, is change the legislators in Florida who will respect public education. So my question to you is, what can we do as a community, since public education really is sort of being demonized? Can you give us suggestions what would be the most helpful thing that we can do to help turn this around?
I mean, I think a number one thing you can do is talk to people and educate your neighbors. It was amazing when we were talking to voters at the at voting sites about the referendum, how many people just weren't aware of the funding situation schools are put in. So I think education is key, not assuming that everyone knows what's happening. Reaching out to other parents, other community members, education and just letting people know the scenario is the biggest thing. But then also holding people accountable for how they vote in Tallahassee. I've heard a lot of our legislators say they support public schools, they support teachers. I mean, you rarely meet a person actually in life who says, we hate teachers. I mean, I honestly don't, and yet I live in a state and have worked in a state now for 9 years where I think everything that happens is directly harming teachers, and I'm also a mom, and it's directly harming my kids. So I think educating the public about all of those things, and then telling people to vote, and to vote for people who will loudly and proudly support public education.
Well, I was just going to say, and I'll be very quick, and I'll kind of go off of what I said at the very beginning. So this community made a loud and clear statement. We support our public schools. And so nobody that is voted on or is elected in this community can ever say anything other than that. So, I think that's the message we have to talk to our delegation, and we have a really supportive delegation here. We've had a meeting just recently that our school board met with our local delegation, and they have had some, they're talking about how do we raise teacher salaries, how do we do those kinds of things, but they're one delegation. So, but we have to keep talking to them though, and we can't allow anyone to say, well, I don't think my constituents will support that. I'm sorry, your constituents just spoke out loud and clear, and they support public education. So no one can say that in this community. We just have to build off that momentum and keep educating people. I think that's the one thing I saw out. People wanted to know, and we just have to keep, and me as superintendent, as the board, we just have to keep educating our community about the needs. And then I think the harnessing of the alignment between PTAs, our teachers, strong community partners, businesses in our community, I think are all on the same page and they want to get behind us.
So I have to disagree with Chair Schamberger, what she said later. Let's stop pretending we have a phenomenal delegation when it comes to supporting public schools. Let's stop pretending. Because they'll stand up. I'm not a politician, so I'm not going to pretend that there are people who will tell me, or will tell you, or will even stand on the floor of the House or Senate and say these wonderful things about from the state house, from the schoolhouse to the state house to the whatever. And then they vote directly in opposition to our public schools. So let's start calling them out, number one. If you need actual facts, I highly recommend you go to the Florida Policy Institute site and look at their budget analysis about how we are devaluing and underfunding our public schools so that you can refute. You know why we have record funding in education? Because we have a record number of students. More students, more money. Not more money per student, just more students and more money. Less money, more students. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Call them out. Don't let them, holding them accountable at the ballot box is one thing, holding them accountable when they're in a room lying is what we have to do on a regular basis because they do it all the time.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I'll disagree with that. I get what you're saying. Melissa and I get along very well, but our Hillsborough delegation has really worked well. The Hillsborough delegation, I want to be clear about that, has really worked well with the school board and the district in getting some things done. So even as an elected, I certainly won't bash them. But talking about bashing, I think one thing we can do is keep the conversation positive. We always focus on the negative, negative, negative. I think by having these meetings, having open dialogue with all of us, with the superintendent especially, educating ourselves on education, and keeping the positive, the wonderful, great things that are going on in education in the forefront will really start to change how education is seen. We all too often just focus on the negative, and I think that has to shift.
Any other answers? No?
Bishop Michelle B. Patty, here's another negative. Swartle High School, it's in the paper that the principal has done some things that she should not have done to promote graduation. So who is responsible for the checks and balances so this should not have happened and does not happen in the future? And if we don't think privatization is good for our schools, then it's not good for our custodians.
So certainly I have extremely high expectations for leaders in our school district. They set the conditions for our teachers to thrive in, for all of our employees to thrive in, for our students to be successful in. If I see leaders that are not meeting those conditions, I'll do what I need to do as a superintendent to remove them from those positions. Certainly when I hear things that I feel like are not meeting the needs of my teachers and my students, I'll act. And so I'm not going to push someone off to somebody else. I'm not going to bring someone to the central office and hide them. I'm going to say, what is the issue that you is supposedly the challenge here, and let's hold people accountable. So after the investigation, actually, which was over the last 5 months, we were clear on what we needed to do as a school district. That employee chose to resign rather than in lieu of termination. But it is something that I hold very, very high as a superintendent, is that my leaders have to take care of their people. And if they're not taking care of their people, if it can't be results at all costs. It's got to be look out for the needs of people and do the right things and do it with integrity.
Absolutely agree with the superintendent on his last statement there. I would say it is one of the biggest things that worries me in this state when I look at the pressure we put on leaders and the pressure we put on teachers. When every kid becomes a number and every number goes into your school grade, and there is huge pressure when you have failing schools, you create circumstances where people sometimes feel desperate to do the wrong thing. And I do worry about that constantly in this state, because I know the teachers at that school had a lot of pressure put on them, and obviously there are people who probably did wrong things. But the issue is, nobody I know gets into education to do bad things. I think we create pressure cooker circumstances in ways we need to really look at, because that has happened in a lot of other districts, that when we make the test, when we make the grade the only thing that matters, people will act in ways that support that, and not necessarily the best ways for students.
So I do agree with Chair Schamberger that we do have to overall keep things positive, because if we beat up on the system, because I'm not beating up on the system, I think the public school system's awesome. So just as the counter, I'm going to take 2 seconds to talk to you about, that was one of 27 high school principals, but we have a lot who are doing amazing things. Who hasn't made the head of the page of the Tampa Bay Times is Gary Brady at Hillsborough High School, who has raised his graduation rate an unbelievable amount. And yes, it's an IB school, but those kids were graduating anyways. It's the kids from Sulphur Springs, it's the kids from Seminole Heights that he's getting, and he has systematized excellence at Hillsborough County. I was walking Hillsborough High School, I'm walking down the hallway with him one day, and there's a student who walks up to him because he makes it very clear that you need to have a 2.0 and have your ABCs, your attendance, behavior, and course progression in place. So this student says to Mr. Brady, one of those 2.0s, how do I get one of those? So he's having the right conversations, so I would be remiss to not say, let's keep it also positive, and if we're gonna hold up people who make the wrong choices, make sure that we highlight the people who make the right choices every day too.
Thank you, Melissa, for that. And so we certainly hold our superintendent.
You can hold it down at the bottom.
Okay. Hold it down here. Okay. So we certainly hold our superintendent accountable for holding his staff accountable. So we certainly are pleased that he took immediate and swift action. Yeah, that was bad. Immediate and swift action to remedy that situation. But as Melissa said, we often focus on just that one negative thing, but we don't highlight enough all of the positivity that's going on in the district. And one thing we really have felt to really talk about are really our students. We get so adult-centered in these conversations, talking about politics and who's done what. But I just want to say kudos to all of the students who are working hard, despite some of the decisions that the adults are making. Our students are achieving great things and they're doing wonderful in the district, and I just want to highlight them.
Thank you. Any other responses on that?
Great questions today.
Am I alive? Yes. We have started a tradition of a closing question, and I'm going to take liberty with that and ask for 2 minutes, if we could, for each one. One of the most proudest moments for me personally was I was awarded a couple years ago PTA President of the Year. And my work in the schools is extremely rewarding. It's important. Our public schools are the lifeblood of our society, our culture, our future. And there's so many great things, as you said, and as we want to focus on. Could you answer 2 questions for me in 2 minutes? What are we most proud of? What do we have to celebrate? And please, these are evangelists. Help them have a great, language of the realities of the great things that are happening, and how would you challenge them to get involved and serve, donate, whatever else we can do to help make a difference. Thank you. Somebody.
So, Tammy actually started to talk about it. One of the things that I'm amazed with as far as our school district is just the incredible students we have in our schools. I mean, if you go out and you see some of the acts our students carry out on a regular basis, and I remember when I was 15, 16, 17 or whatever, and I see what they're doing, your jaw would just drop. You would be in awe. I mean, it doesn't matter what neighborhood, where you are, where you live in this district, it doesn't matter what elementary, middle, or high. I'm just amazed by the maturity of our students, but also just the character of our kids. And I think that's what I'm most proud of. As a superintendent, I've told people a lot, you can go and look at all the data and look at all those kinds of issues. Education is a people business. It's about how you use your own personal skills or character to hopefully impact the lives of others. And so when you see what our teachers, what our leaders are doing in front of our kids, what our community members are doing in front of our kids to build great character in them, to make better choices, those are the kind of things that make me most proud of being a superintendent of schools, is to see the great students and the character that we have out there. And that's directly related to the incredible employees that model the great character in front of them every single day. And so that would be what I would say to this community is we live our lives out in front of our kids, and so what they see us do, what they hear us say, ultimately they are going to do and say. So I just encourage us as a community to still be that positive voice for them, still make sure we're doing the right things, we're modeling the right things in front of them, so ultimately generations to come will have an amazing community in Tampa Bay.
How can they help your schools other than modeling?
Get involved. I mean, the only way you can really help to impact a student is to find some way to get involved. I was on WFLA this morning early, and we were promoting CEO in schools. That's coming out right now, so that's on October. That we'll have someone from a CEO from our community come in and spend a day as a principal alongside our principals in our schools. And I know we have another program, Educate Hillsborough, that maybe I'd like for Melissa to talk a little bit about. But that's another way you can get involved, just learn more about our schools, and then ultimately be great advocates.
So, speaking from a board perspective, one thing that we're extremely proud of is this guy right here. Jeff is an amazing superintendent. He has done wonders for this district, righting the ship, getting us back financially where we need to be, and setting us up for a strong and amazing future. And so Jeff has created a culture of caring and loving our district, and so we certainly appreciate that. And so we know that you'll be retiring in June, and it really breaks our heart that you're leaving us, but you're leaving us in a fantastic position, and so the board can't be prouder to have worked with you.